Hello and good morning, everybody. It is Sunday, July 7th at 11:11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I thought to myself, I have to do another episode because I like to do a weekly expression, whether it's a podcast, a digestion, or maybe more like a deconstruction. Either way, whether it's an interview with somebody else or my own personal discussion, I want to be able to create more of a ongoing series that allows my expressions to act as a work of art as I continue to navigate my own works of art behind the scenes. This way I can still provide myself a vehicle to express myself ideas and concepts that aren't always built upon and expanded upon. The dough hasn't risen enough. So this is my way of getting to the sum of the dough that I haven't gotten to so that we can bake some bread. So the last video I did was 1 week ago on the 1st of July, and that kind of took a look at Clif High's July 15th, which also brought in a number of subjectives from other astrologers. Then you had remote viewers taking a look at it. Then you had the reflection back and forth of continued Clif High's further clarification of his perspective based off his data analysis. So on top of that, with the data available, I think we want to say that there's a number of events that are leading up into this mid-July month. Now, specifically, we have climate-wise dealing with essentially a hurricane coming up, going towards Texas, that built itself up from the Atlantic. Now, the Atlantic is built up from the pressures available from essentially the eastern seaboard. Now, when you see that built up in this time of year, I think the very reaction that ended up being activated by was due to a storm system that we actually had in the last week. And not just any storm system. This was a high heat, multiple 90 days breaking because the energetic heat was storing so much into the mass of ability to extend its field enough where the condensity of the condensation can't help but pull itself, and then it gets spiraled into allowing the water to hold itself up until it's ready to release through the buildup. And when we have this release, you have these rains, but you also have the lead into it, this changeover, this high wind flushing itself out. Now, every single time during this one particular day, I thought it was so strange. Every single time the storm was going off, you'd hear the thunder, you'd hear the lightning. You wouldn't hear it, you'd see it, but you would encounter it. And then I would feel this electrical shock in a certain part of muscles of my body. Particularly, this would be my foot, where I previously had a broken toe. So I don't know if there's something from that from over a decade ago that plays a role in how it healed or how it sealed. Either way, I think the relative nature of what I was experiencing in the foot was this sharp pain, but it was like an electrical shock almost. And it did not at first dawn upon me that it was timed with the storm until eventually I would start to see lightning and then hear the thunder. And as the thunder's rolling, I'm feeling this coming out of my foot. And I'm totally WTFing this whole situation, because I'm okay, what is this? Should I ground? Should I try some shungite? Should I try tuning for it? Should I attempt to make sure that I'm not next to an electronic device? Is it the land? Is it the pulsing of the storm? Is it in between the storm? Is there an influence of radio frequencies or some sort of frequencies playing a part on the storm? Then I connected to the fact that a lot of the cosmic rays that play a part in things influence the storms to beat, influence what comes in. Now, I think that plays a direction because there's a degree of how much you're getting the pulsation in that's creating the condensation, and how much you're getting the reversal, the cosmic rays, you can call them, but It's essentially where the sun magnetically is not pulling into the earth, in which case you get these openings of other rays coming in. You could say it's starlight, but it's just as much as the ocean of the stars. So when we have this flowing in, you see this start to electrically create these clouds so that they start to connect and pull together and create the water droplets. Since water is fluid, it starts to build itself up so that these molecules that you see and understand as like oxygen with these hydrogen, so it's H2O, you need to have the ability to create two of them to connect to one. But when you're creating these blocks, you're building it from the oxygen that is readily available, as well as the hydrogen being produced by the energetic exchange from when you're creating these electrical capacities. So H, hydrogen, is what comes in through the electrical potential. So when you have that with the oxygen state, that's the coming into a field of sorts, but it's generating inside that field. So once you have that, you begin to create the water once you have enough of a stable form. When you have a stable form, that's when you start to see condensity. Now, when you have the storm come to you, like I said, it's an exchange of pressure. You have this high heat happening where it's letting in so much. And then because of this, you build it up, you build it up, you build it up, and then it has to wash in like a tide in terms of the changeover. Once you have it built up too much, that the heat starts to crack because of the electrical impulse, that we can't help but have either heat lightning or the rain. Because you have so much of this electrical charge that's built up because of the heat, you have no choice but to feel this. And when you feel that wind coming from you, that's that urge, that's the push, that's the current, because it's generating not only a wind push, but it's an electrical change of bringing in the electrical capacity. And when you have electricity, when you're looking at a device like a computer that needs to keep itself cool, the more it has electrical potential or processing power. And when you're dealing with like water, which is electrical, and when it's in the air connecting, its conduit to create this flow is conductive based off the ionic sphere, the way in which the earth is being able to let in energy. So it's kind of riding that surface, so to say, in which we're perceiving these clouds, these ways of going in. Now you have the concepts of like these natural weather phenomenons that are occurring. Now let's introduce the concepts that are associated with more influential. So I know that there's been studies just as much as like MK Ultra has been around. There's been the concept of utilizing what has been perceived from the Nikola Tesla majority of technology available to us in the last century has given us the idea that we can also utilize the radio frequencies and wavelengths and frequencies in general to create influences just like in the weather. Now you can also see this with orgone and pretty much what is perceived as cloud busters, which are utilizing this copper energetic buildup from the Earth's natural resources and energy, and you're allowing that to extend to a point that actually reaches up, clearing away. So it creates a current to all that buildup. And we see a lot of buildup not only in the atmosphere, because we're looking at pretty much modern geoengineering programs that are essentially pretty much given the name chemtrailing, where it's injected out through the vehicle as a secondary leftover, because it's there, it's present. You have various different materials, whether you're looking at it at the metallic base or if you're looking at it at the compound base, you're still looking at these buildups of particles that are now present in this spatial area. Now, if you were to take, let's say, partial area of a soil from another land and you start to give particles in a completely different, let's say, environment, you start to shift not only the soil, but you're shifting the way we're actually having availability of what to work with, what to transform. For example, nature will create mushrooms to dissolve areas of materium that is present that needs to be decomposed or transformed or returned back into something that can then resolve itself to the cycle of the forest. So when you're looking at the way it transforms, nature has created something, but once you start introducing it, then you start to get into the concepts associated when you take away too much hunting or introduce too many new animals to an environment. I know some ways that you're introducing the way to recreate prey and natural balances of nature are effective to restore. But when you're doing these sort of things, it's because something has already happened. Most cases, any direct human involvement on the environment does influence some sort of outcome, whether we're looking at it as the passage of the scent in the area and who has to mark their territory more, or even the concept of how much we thread through. But the thing is, when you look at nature, it's very open. There's no walls. I mean, there are stones, there are structures, there's winds which we build upon it, but we use those as security when we need them, like a bear uses hibernation of a den. We utilize more of the nature as an open-ended room. We explore, so we don't own a territory. We can mark that we're in this area when we're trying to compete or create a defense, create a secure parameter in which we call our locality. But there's such nomadic animals too that traverse around trying just to scavenge and forage what they could at the time. So when you're looking at these natural processes, you see all this come about. Now, linking it back to the idea of geoengineering, when you have the introduction of additional, you can say, compounds, or even the idea of these constituents of reality, in which you want to call metals, if you want to call them the carbon, whatever, the way in which we're building up the materials, whether they're bonded or whether they're ultimately in particles. So either way, we're working with these building blocks. It's like you're giving a Lego set, but you're giving this a set amount. You have to work with these. Otherwise, you have a bunch left over, and when you don't do with them, they kind of just sit there. Now, the thing is, you don't get to just not play with them. When you have it a part of your earth, part of your farm, part of your soil that you're growing your food in, you can't help but like take in consideration, how did I get here? What do I do to resolve this? I know many of us have to take into consideration not only the potential of how much is poisonous out there based off the chemicals and use due to the regulatory system that creates this okay check mark to say, yes, this is good enough not to kill us, but it's still not the best for us. But the regulation of allowing less and less exposes us more to more, in which you're getting this multifaceted, almost program of all these variables coming at you, whether it's looking at the food supply, the limited availability of what you're getting in terms of like nutrients, things that actually are going to help you and heal you. Most industries out there want you to understand that you utilize a product because you want to ensure that you have a dependency. But most of the people who create products turn you into their product, because not only do they work with not only the structures and systems in place, but now with big data and the way in which we can process utilizing mass functioning, like AI, you can call it, we are now challenging not only the way in which we're committing to a system, but utilizes it, shows that they can create this information timetable that shows us where we are participating in the system. So when we're participating in the system, we can't just openly support it while still participating in it. So we have to opt out. We have to find an alternative way. And many of us are finding methods in detoxing, finding ways of deconstructing and trying to wean out these aspects that have been slowly poisoning or taking away our life because we were so conditioned or distracted that we were unable to give it the time of day to give their respect. Because some of us, we might not honor ourselves, but as soon as you have a child, as soon as you have someone to take care of for, you want to make sure that they are given the best just as much as they're given the opportunity to do better. So even if we don't support ourselves, we want to at least help those that we want to support. So the mindset still plays a role, even if we don't put ourselves first 100% of the time, because we still consider, how do we go about this? How do we become healthier? How do we live longer? Not even for the length, but for the idea, how much life can we bring present? How much can it be? I said the word being. How much can it being? Being, I guess if I had to deconstruct it on the spot, is be. It's the dividing of I, the being of I, and to the G, which is the generation. So it's what continues to go on. I guess what you bring minus the R is the being. It's continuous onness of the division of what continues on in the building blocks. It's the way it's one after the other. So if we look at this and we look at the way in that we're like evolving to not only take into consideration of like the areas of our earth, whether it's getting back into homesteading, getting back into having your backyard chickens or growing your garden, or even being interested in just changing your food or your even where you invest your time and energy, are all part of the same communication language, you can say, that interacts these same symbols or the way we interact with these symbols. It's the same type of principle. It's just we're applying it to different sectors. So when we look at trying to invest in better time and energy and resources to support ourselves health-wise, you also see this, we become more available. So many of us who have, over the period of time, accumulated a lot of heavy metals, we're not even talking just fillings through amalgamations, we're talking about just buildup through either the food system, through rogue particles that are present through chemical, you can say foreign agents, but they're not norm. So we've been adapting to them by absorbing them into our system, whether we want to or not. So we have to look into methods of solutions. How do we navigate it? How do we work our way through it? Now, many of us would like to take the time to really give ourselves the time and energy we truly need to not only like give ourselves the best health, but give it to the people we love. And we all know we can't take a horse to water and expect it to drink. So we need to live by example. So many of us are trying to embody the idea more of what we have to do. And as we go do this, many of us have gone through the detoxing, have gone through and done a lot of the reevaluation of where they can work on themselves, improve themselves, and not only maybe even learn a little bit more, because we can always learn, but where can we make better steps? How can we be more efficient to support ourselves? How can we change and release and let go, not overnight, but gradually, knowing that we're shifting to a better? Can we wake up the next day knowing that we're ready to release and let go and start a new cycle, something that is going to take us closer to who we are, embodying who we truly are meant to be, not just copy and paste solution that gives us, AI subtext to just fill in the blanks. We don't want to ad-lib this for something else to fill in. We ultimately come to creation, so we play a role to create. So we can honor ourselves to create is just as much a choice as it is a choice not to create. So we always have the choice. But in coming to the choice of heavy metal detoxing, due to the environmental increase of rogue foreign agents available in the environment, we are now taking a look at how we can take steps. Now, there are many solutions available, and I'm sure there's going to be a dozen more as we explore like what's truly capable of not only us in nature, but us as a potential of a generative species to work with nature that is also generative. So together, can we co-create something? So much medicinal plants and natural resources that can do the job well. So we look at aspects like citrus pectin, which is able to hold on to and attract some of these metals and detox them out of the system. Then you look at aspects like IP6, which sometimes includes additional things like, I believe it's inosol or something like that. I doubt I pronounce it right because it's not like I speak with anybody about this directly. So this is more of just like my recall of the pronunciation, which is working for me to identify what it is, and hopefully you understand. But this IP6 too is a chalater, so it works to bond things like iron and copper so that you can create a connection so many things can bond to and essentially attract itself to pass through the body. Now, there's other methods too. People utilize aspects like zeolite, which is a more intense way of doing it. Shilajit also offers you the ability to also boost yourself because you're utilizing limited resources but rich. It's like getting the most expensive gasoline. That's what Shilajit is. You're giving yourself the body, the resin of not only matter that also goes to so many parts of your body to help it, but it also allows it to flush through and attract and detox because of the way it's able to work with these constituents. So either way, you're looking at like a lot of avenues already mentioned that we can detox. So these are solutions. And then as we find solutions, how do we detox the environment? How do we detox the soil? Do we also offer solutions like encasements, like a greenhouse? For example, we're growing food. Or if we're creating our own financial investments, do we create our own bank? Do we create our own encasement, our own protection from the environment of rogue agents? Yeah. Do we also continue to take in new language that puts us into new positions, new ways of looking at things, new perspectives that change things? And now this whole conversation here stemmed from the idea that we have this system of this hurricane coming in. And I wanted to connect it to how we had this storm last week. And during that storm, I was feeling this electrical connection in my foot as the storm was going off. Now, if we look at the way that the nature is responding, this could be some sort of extra electrical energetic potential available in the field of what you can say is Earth. Or this could be a secondary influence. Let's say it's a frequency induced. It could be, for example, the way in which we allow mass to generate more, heat to generate more, or even the use of orgone energy, or even the wave directed wavelengths to capture and meet other wavelengths to induce not only either a form or a way to respond to a form that once you have it, you introduce this harmonic, or not even a harmonic, but a step up. You can even bounce it like a pinball in terms of energy enforcement, energy direction. But what if that energy direction that we had from that buildup in this last week influenced what occurred to become the hurricane currently coming through the Caribbean in towards Texas? Now, I didn't do too much deep dive into it, and I didn't look into the Doppler reader and the maps specifically, but I did see a lot coming out from reposts and such of individuals showcasing that you see a lot of anomalies on these radars. And some of them are just wavelengths of pulses that are occurring either to push or direct away, whether it's coming above or below, whether you're looking at it from the ocean or from above, you're still seeing that if the ocean is its own ocean of interconnected hydrogen and oxygen, then the atmosphere above it is interconnected of hydrogen and oxygen. It's just not the coupling of the hydrogen to the oxygen. So when you're still dealing with this oceanic wavelength, we still have an influence on it, especially when you're dealing with electrical potential of bondage of water that can then hold itself together due to its electrical conduction. We have electrical conduction when we're grounded because the Earth is connected not only by its water being attracted to it, by the electrical potential that we call magnetism based off of us communicating with the same language, with the same harmonic that is present. We are an attractor because we're of the same materials, just as much as we are of the same materials that are expressing the songs that are harmonizing with our navigation. So that's why we're present in here. So either way, we're coming back into this because I want to dig back into the reflection of what Clif High was stating when he was going more towards into the remote viewers like Dick Allgire, and specifically his mention of being able to recognize both of them bouncing off one another, or saying these cranial interactions, these ways of the body being induced by magnetic impulsions, or influence, I should say. Now, if you want to take that acknowledgement of what I just said and influence it into that, not even influence, but like play with it to build that concept. I just experienced firsthand what it was like, this buildup, this idea of this storm creating this pain, this conduction of electrical energy that is influencing the body. Now, I am only having my experience. Who knows who else was experiencing something, even if it was minor or if it was connected to something greater. Could be that there's something that is particularly set off, or it could be that it is an energetic or wavelength that is close to responding to the electrical connectivity. So you're feeling it due to an event, and woo-wee. Okay, so it's a hot one. And because of that, I had to pretty much just like change the battery, get a cup of water, and I'm going to go sit in front of the fan after all this. But it's 90s now. It's been 90s all week. And I want to discuss that the fact that I was experiencing something that was associated with a storm that was present. It could have had a buildup, could have had influence. I personally felt pain that magnetically induced because of the way that it's not tied, but it was felt, but still part of the field in which I am, and the field of my environment that we were both connected to. And due to me witnessing the influences of what was going on when I was feeling it, when nature was also conducting its feeling, that's when it would thunder. So whether we are both relatively feeling these energies being present through us, or whether it's a response of one of the energies to the other, we're perceiving an example in which we can learn and study from. Now, when we're going through this, we're looking at the way in which we look at these remote viewers also provide these concepts of ideas. Now, any interpretation is going to be shaped off the experience of both the individual, their perspective and experience that brought them what they can envision and encase, because the symbols that they have to work with are based off what they've come up to in their organic body up to that point. Even the relativity of something new through the dreamscape can still come through the experience of how we have the input. So up to that point is how we receive the symbols, and how we shape the symbols comes through to the information and clarity. We can sharpen in on it. But any perspective of anything that has yet to happen outside of the now only gives a perspective of an angle, a perspective that can change through the reorientation of any one or any moment in that unraveling. So seeing them deconstruct the idea that we're going to have this nervous system reaction, I associate, I've already experienced something during this month since my last statement of having a non-forecast forecast of what I perceive is happening. So not only is this happening now, but the language is coming out through this video of the same actions, of the same conversation, through the same sources, leaking out through those who are aware of it, through the message, through the body of nature that is present, unraveling. Now, the last time I spoke to you, we were experiencing up to the point where Mercury was meeting opposite of Pluto. Now we're building to these energies still. So we're seeing this mercurial, this way of expressionist nature, utilizing these energies, these forces, to translate the way in which we're trying to reorientate the way we look at transformations. Nobody likes transformations because it's a change most of the time. And a lot of us get accustomed to, and when we look at transformation, it's because we have to look at the shadow. And the shadow shows us what we've neglected or what we have failed to show up for in a way that has, in turn, given us the opportunity to feel as though we still have lessons to learn. So when we look at the shadow and acknowledge it, I see the opportunity where when you have a reflection of the reflection, we want to see it all. We see the different perspectives by having a reflection. Through reorienting what we look as the transformation taking place, we then can acknowledge it in a new way so that we can integrate it more or allow ourselves to release karma and baggage associated from previous orientations that were not 100% valid or true to not either who we are or the nature that we were perceiving. And with Neptune going into retrograde, we see these ideas of deconstructing the illusion, the optimal idealism, even the way we look hope. We got this idea of hope that we perceive almost to create this meme of an external savior, when in reality, the Christ you're looking for is within. The Christ that you have to bring to the earth comes through you from within. So there's no external savior outside of the fact that you yourself are the potential, the optimal, the very act of creation that holds potential to bring creation. So it's always in the hands of the individual, just as much as it's in the hands of the individual to not only have the conversation, to express the energy, acknowledge the nature, but then utilize not only our components, but our interconnected capabilities to then build upon something beyond this, so that we're not also re-navigating old cycles, but we're transcending them. We're utilizing our own ability to observe through the unique perspectives each of us have, through the unique essences that we are made up of, coming in at this right time, at this right perspective, with this right flavor. We can communicate through the strengths and gifts that we are all given by universe. That's why we understand that there's different flavors. One can perceive as a negative, but it can also have a positive because it has a specialty. It has a way of communicating naturally because there's an essence to it that is familiar. It's the way in which we connect and are able to operate in it because it understands a language without having to create the language. In which case, your rhythm, your dance is communicated through the music that is playing. It's not something that requires you to have a sense of communication that requires a standard. Your standard is a listening modality. It is a way of understanding the universe is present. And I think looking at this month, there's a lot that comes into play because I believe towards the end, towards the full moon, we're getting Chiron, which is then going retrograde. In perception, like I said, retrograde is just in orientation of where we are. a change in perspective to reorient ourselves. That is not moving anywhere more on its journey. It's continuing its journey as it is, but we are perceiving it in a different manner. So because of this, we give ourselves the ability not to feel so stuck from the same perspective. So we're freshening up, and we're also giving ourselves the ability to lighten up and to release not as much because we are drifting more than it is being able to come towards us. We're giving ourselves more of the ability to work with it. More space in between us gives us the ability to step away from the art. So then when we come and revisit it again, we have fresher perspectives to look at it differently from a grown perspective. We've gained an experience, we've gained an understanding, and we're more of ourselves than we were yesterday. Through the presence of just allowing ourselves to be, because we pick up new experiences just as much as we pick up new dreams from resting in the evening, overnight. We have a sense of ourself that is not always pertained to the body, but the experience of us is the consciousness that is contributing to the experience. The flavors and the constructs are just what we happen to have to work with. So we want to be embodied. We're embodying because we have the potential to embody based on what's here. And we can embody ourselves more to be potentially more present, but it's not a way in which we integrate it by force. It's a way in which it's almost understanding to be present is to trust and have flow without trying to force it, because you want to dance, but you don't want to paint by the numbers. That is not art. That is not creation. That is a way in which you can perceive to look like you're doing what you think. But I think in a way, this brings me back to the idea that doing in a way does help, because I believe that I managed to not only learn a lot of when I did my divinative decks, the way I did my tarot deck. Each card I pursued allowed me to work with the energy to understand it more, not only through the art, but through the environment I was working with. I experienced the energies firsthand, whether it's through an individual or through the concept of what was happening at the time. Continued this into astrology, continued this into medicinal plants and herbalism. So as I illustrated over 100 plants, I was able to not only work with them, but communicate and understand how they're made up of, understand the symbol of why nature built it this way. And then at the same time too, match this experience with my learning of utilizing them and understanding them, that to me, the act of illustrating them, drawing them, learning about them, those acts embody those experiences and knowledge into me and my body. My organic body has this muscle memory that I can pass on genetically for generations, which is why we have ancestral support. But when we are acting to do something that connects us, we embody it. We embody it through action because we're driving a passion, we're taking a vehicle. When we have an experience and you witness beautiful nature, you had to arrive there. You had to take a vehicle to get there. Sometimes it's the right place at the right time. And those places, those moments, when you're experiencing that, that is universe knowingly letting you see that you are on the right track, that you as an individual are experiencing something that is beyond yourself, that takes you back to yourself more than you were able to contextualize prior to the experience. But that's us always healing, always piecing ourselves back together. Now going into this 17th, this 15th, 16th, 17th of July, you have a number of events. So we have this buildup of magnetic influence. You have this hurricane coming in to the United States, which happens to be on Texas, where both cases of last year and earlier this spring accompanied a pretty much eclipse directly on the state of Texas. So whatever influence is coming in, maybe there's something that is external to the environment or local to the environment that is playing a part to see why this is happening. But the storms buildup also continue into the weekend, going to next week. And that's experiencing the whole nation. Are we experiencing electrical potential? Is it being influenced upon where we are experiencing the potential of Earth to receive additional magnetic influences that we ourselves have to work with? And when we don't have an area to work with, when we construe it or when we have a tightening, that's where pain offsets, because it's the inability for it to exist as it is experiencing the difference. That difference is the pain you are experiencing, that exposure, that way of it not matching up. That's why when you're exposed, you're cut, your field itself, you're feeling the magnetic pull of those materials connected through your environment. That's what your pain is feeling. So you're feeling a magnetic influence regardless of how you're feeling the physical, but it's happening through the physical, and that's what you're perceiving the most. So when this is happening, you have this all coming into play. Now let's throw in the whole political blanket. You have this uniparty that is just straight up. They all support the same war, but the whole concept is like, are any of them the people we need? No, I don't think so. I think there might be in better positions when you look at individuals who want to help us get back on track. And there's individuals that are getting us worse on track. It's designed that way almost. But like I said in the last one, these are some straight up Scooby-Doo positions. We can't really entrust these things to be what they are perceived to be, let alone what we want them to be. They're merely just eye holes to be filled by whatever we want to perceive. We can't pull off the mask until we realize it is a mask. And then we pull off the mask, in which we all come back to the same idea. Why do we let this happen? Why do we allow it? And why are we continuing to allow it? In which case, we choose not to allow government to govern us, but we choose to govern ourselves from the government that fails to govern us by this chance of supporting us. They don't support us. They govern us because their lack of support is to support themselves. That is why you have a system that gets co-opted to then become something that, in which case, I guess, crumbles a nation. That's why you have a fall of society, of these, you can say these empires, but the idea is that these structures are not 100% all the time. They're not 100% built on nature, and they're based off the perspective we have at the time. Based off their availability of the perception and what we have to work with, creates the majority of perception. Now, when you limit that, you're dividing up not only the ability to work with a greater understanding, but then you limit the forces. This is no differently than when you see government limiting the amount that you can do for its own benefit. So when it wants to limit you, when it wants to take away what you can do, when it wants to tell you, no, you can't act in that flexibility, even if you have reason, even if you have a God-given right, even if you have nature, there has been legislation to create boundaries to prevent you from being who you truly are meant to be. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go against what is being stated outside the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all these concepts in which are created by this country and its states. We are looking at the concept of whether these systems are 100% able to live timelessly through the generations. When we look at the Constitution, we look at something that's solid, that's meant to be universal. But when we look at something that happened in the last century, we look at the hijacking of institutions, the influence of false money, the way in which we were creating an electrical system to perceive people to get onto it, in which they become their own conduits. But this system itself is so an illusionary tactic that many of us have become so lost in it that all they've ever done is what they call a 9-to-5. And that's all their time is given towards. Their time is their heart, their mittens. So why do you give to a system? Why do you give to this? Because you're only supporting a system that doesn't support you. You're just utilizing the system in exchange for others who also have chosen to participate in the system. Now, you take the system, you give it an honest face, you pull that mask off, you then decide shift. Okay, let's take a look at what can we do from here? Where can we exchange? Now, we already have solutions. Like I mentioned, solutions, we have metals. We have solutions because individuals have already taken the time and energy and even resources to build upon pathways to navigate from here. We just need to make the choice to pursue what works for us. Now, it's not always easy to take back the responsibility that we forgave, especially the longer we've foregone it. For us to have an idea, how do we get back into that control? How do we get back into our power? How do we get back into ourself? That's ultimately why we're trying to figure this all out. I think we're going into Cancerian energies that are going to dominate. And then that's going to give us more of a sense that by August, we should have a sense of identity for that Leo to shine. Especially once Mercury goes in, once Venus goes in, and then eventually we get the sun going in, we're going to have a lot more of this energy happening with fire. And that's going to communicate mostly with a lot that has a lot of potential. But what I'm more interested in is come September, October, November is going to be both this time of coming back to eclipse energies by oppositions, but we're also revisiting relationships with Chiron. We're also revisiting relationships with Uranus and Jupiter. We're also revisiting various sectors of the sky that are association to retrograde. So when we're going to these things, we're going to have a direct encounter with a lot of these reflections instead of just a perception of opposition, which gives us a good perspective to look at it at a distance to get an idea so we can meet in the middle. But when we're on top of one another, that is an enforcement of it working together. So we're going to see how they work together later in the year, because that's going to get more interesting as things build up. I think a lot of things are potentially open to transform the next 2 years into this gradual fluctuation of not only build up, but empowerment from the inside out. So I think many of us are not only giving the building blocks to the great meme war, but we're also opening the doorways to show others the potential of what can exist. Because I think we need to learn, and we are stubborn sometimes. So when we have an experience, it gives us perspective to take in information, and not 100% are we willing to show up in that moment, which is why you have difficulties of that stubbornness being witnessed by individuals who are still on board ideas and concepts that they themselves are trying to support something that has abandoned them prior to their realization. It's not always going to work out in their favor, but that's a realization that they're not ready to face yet. But I think when we have a reorientation, or when it catches up to us, either or, we can't help but change. And change is great because we have the potential to change with this opposition of retrograde Pluto, this way of letting in not only change potential through the light. We need to give in potential by being the light in which then harmonizes with that potential. So through us acting us self out through being, we have the potential to bring that change in. But are we going to see it right away? Not always. We have a lot happening in what is perceived to be Aries in the Taurus. Now, this Aries in the Taurus, this energetic rise, that is embodiment, essentially, how we communicate and connect. This is building up a lot with Mars going through. Mars building up to Uranus and Jupiter. We want to take that. We want to roll with it. We want to see what's beyond that. But I think we're going to step by step it. I think we're going to work with it by working with the house, working with the locality, working from the garden inside out. And like the garden, you don't get it done in a season. You start somewhere. And over time, you learn from mistakes. You learn from the seasons. You learn from where it went wrong. You don't always work with the season 100% because you are not ready to work with the season. But you can still participate. And through working with where you can in the season, you then take in the ability to learn, to grow, to apply it year after year, so that when you fractally revisit this part of the season, this temperature, you are ready to take on more when you're ready to take on more. And you're doing so is this gradual uptake. That's why we have this beauty of this Taurian nature to support us. And having it through these combustible signs like Uranus and Mars, and even Jupiter, that just brings us this expansion. We're revisiting a lot how we look at finances due to the structure of support, through the security to connect. And that's how do we get our food? Where do we get our food? What is in the resources that we are utilizing? And where can we refine those resources to better support our future, our generations, not just our children, but for their children, and so on. We need to reevaluate not only to make a change in the potential we have, but do it through the family. We change the world through the family out because we can support one another and understand one another more. We may be less tolerant of those that we don't daily connect to, but I think that many of us have the influence to know we are shining when we act in our true self. So when we embodying that truth, embodying that orientation towards the closest harmonic value that takes us back on path to our goal, we have our best chance at not only creating the best change possible, but even to do it without knowing the answer, without having to navigate it with a certainty that you know what's going to happen or that you have the answer. You trust that you're present and to be present, and that along the way, you will arrive where you need to. The answers will show themselves when you need to. And what you will say and how you will do it will find its way out. It will find its way like a blossom. And like a forest, there's so much to look at. There's always so much to say, and there's always so much to experience. It's so much of life always happening. So we need to look at where we ourselves are connected. How are we connected? I think the change that we're going to happen on a nation and the change that we're going to happen at an individual level is important that we honor who we are first. Then we work out the locality of the community. Then we work at the locality of the state. Once we have the state figured out in terms of direction, when we look at somewhere, I believe it was Tennessee, that is trying to ban and attempting to have passed legislation for geoengineering and how that could have an effect. As this branches out, we then work towards the country. We then work towards the nation, and then we start to deal with the global issues at play. And when I say global issues, this is people and individuals and corporations that have chosen to take a global reach towards an individual compromisation. So when we look at the individuals at play, we ourselves know that we have this WEF problem. We have a lot of systems like in climate change. You look at the climate change as a evaluation of the consciousness of light of present available energy coming into an existence in which we have to then utilize that energy for an expression. Build that up the wrong way, you have volcanoes. I think we need to transform the idea of what climate is based off the idea of weather and utilize it as a message of nature that can communicate the idea of what can happen if we ourselves as a consciousness state of collectiveness are unable to operate and process. And I think that nature should be just like Earth should be. And when you have this life force energy that is traveling through the fractalness of source of light of all the connectedness, we have the potential to embody that through the consciousness that we're witnessing, able to gift through the resources we have, through the body we have, through the environment that we get to interact with. Our resources say a lot. And I think when we work with the limited amount, you get a more greater appreciation. But when you work with a wider amount, you get a greater experience. So we need to honor that there's different times and spectrums, but there's also times and places that we need to perceive. I think when we navigate through to July, we're going to witness events. But I don't think the events themselves are going to be too triggering. I think we ourselves, the biggest trigger, the biggest transformations, still arrive at the sense of deconstructing that we ourselves have limited our perspective, and we ourselves have ignored so much of the reality that is present even without perception. And we have to take responsibility of how much we participate in that, because we have the potential and we can show up for it. And many of us know firsthand, you can have an experience at night we call a dream. You can embody this state and you can allow yourself to grow and interact so that when you build out to change the world, your part in it is based off your state of your being, the state of who you are. And where you align is not a collective reasoning. Where you align is a local reasoning of where you are in that time based off who's around you and what's around you. And at the end of the day, wouldn't we all like to be secure and feel comforted? Won't we all want to feel that we can feel at peace in nature, supported by nature? When you introduce foreign agents to an environment that is not only incapable of interacting on a basis, but becomes stressed because of the way it has to interact in a new environment through adaptation that it may not have been available to at the time. And even the ways in which we look at the way of the integration, in which you have to change not only systems at play, but systems that are present. For example, an ecosystem based off the available animals can shift based off the introduction of a new prey or predator. And the way in which we want to even state the integration of this shifts the environment to change. When you look at the change in ways we want to see weather, we see the potential of shift. But we see influence from the sun, from solar by cosmic influences. But then you can hear stories of influence of the weather through people of cloud busting, through individuals of prayer. When you have collective prayer, you can give enough energy, enough almost listening potential that then shapes itself to have this water that has memory, that has the ability to act just like a crystal, harmonize with what energy that you are embodying through your experience, even collective. We influence like a harmonic. We act almost like a symphony that amplifies. So when you have this, you also apply that to a technology. You know, when our technology today is utilizing crystals and architecture to create these magnetic functions, you already know that we've explored the potential to even utilize the frequencies and the abilities to shape what we can perceive, which is why you've had programs, everything from the consciousness of MK Ultra being studied to weather manipulation of geoengineering through the frequencies of utilizing not only just like the heat and function of utilizing how much pressure energy is condensing to how much it's expanding based off how much it's bouncing off. You could shape it is just as much as when you are working with something that is always moving. You take away from here, but then you take away from here, then you take away from here. You can shape it, or you can refine it over time with proper tools, and you could have accuracy down to the minuscule, where you can have this efficiency where it's almost kind of like an art where you go and you just. And speaking of instantly arriving, SD card filled up. So I should wrap this up. I don't want to ramble too much. I think I wanted to connect the fact that we had this weather phenomenon, and then we're connecting it to the potential that's happening. And I didn't even mention anything that's going on politically, like the political blanket that I mentioned. That was going to be the idea of placing in that we're having these conventions to choose vice presidencies and stuff. And I think that both parties fail to show up where we need them. And I think that's where I was going with my message, that we don't need to have this governing body because they have been unable to support us. When there is potential for the people to enact enough pressure for change to happen, we realize that we've always had the power. We realize we are the ones that influence more than these individuals that we want to change. We want to bring change, or we want them to be the change. But in reality, we need to be the change. We change the system by demanding that that is not what we want, by choosing to make a declaration, by choosing independence, by choosing how we want to have our future. The choice is always ours. So let that be known, because we're not here to be given an option of choices. Choice and non-choice is still a choice, meaning the two choices that you have to work with and the options you have outside those choices are why you're only given two choices, because those choices outside those two choices will let you free more than you will ever know. Now, you can understand why those choices are present, but then you can start to create more choices in your life that ultimately will shape and change you for the better, to change others around you by acting as a role of inspiration that puts you in a position of experience, not only to help people in the future, but to be a guiding light, a lighthouse for those who are navigating high seas, to those who are navigating storms, to those that are navigating in the fog, for those who are experiencing pretty much unexpected weather along their journey. We know that by those who have made the travels, conducted the maps, created the conversations, the routes, even the trades of concept, we are applying our lessons through the cultural generations in which we're able to merge our ancestry with our presence to create a future. So, with all that said and done, with all that said, I hope that this actually evolved into something. I don't know if this is a continuation of the previous conversation, which by conversation, I guess it's just me talking to a camera, but it's moving forward. I'm watching it move forward. I'm introducing to this conversation what I've witnessed since the last conversation, and then I'm applying that through the knowledge that I have with you, through what feels right to me now, what I perceived over the period of time that feels important, and what I'm observing. And in the time span, I do keep an eye out to listen to podcasts and stuff. I listen to astrologers, even if they follow a Western model. I look at the planetary relationships, because when you have these sectors of the sky, they're still present. Even if we use different models, the way that we're positioning them does not change. That is all just a matter of communication, of perception, of how we decide to place upon them the measurements, the locale of measurements. For example, we don't always have to apply the concept to a day of the week when that is a conceptual ordering. But when you look at a constellation in the sky, that constellation is always there. Whether we want to acknowledge that as the constellation that we've embodied as Cancer, or just the area of the sky, which Western astrologers shape it to be something else, we want to know that that star has not moved. That's nature. We need to look at nature so we understand and communicate a better sense of nature. I think we need to improve our language of nature, because we're nature. It should not be hard. I think we need to actually just take our time to gain the experience so that it becomes a natural expression through our nature. But we also need to understand that we need to take care of our nature and nurture our nature like a temple. We need to be the ones responsible not only for ourselves, but for our own body, for the way we nurture our own body. As if we were our own earth, we need to understand that we are our own potential to understand who we are and how we are. The whole body can tell you everything about you, just as much as you can use the body to understand aspects that are within you. It's part of something that we are connected to understand, but takes the ability of high functioning mental connections to create a system so that we can interpret it. But the faith we have is an instinct. It's the way in which we're breathing. We know part of ourselves is something that is beyond us. It's a soul. It's something that is through the spirit of who we are. We're not just a body when we can have a dreamy experience. We're not just a body when we can have an outer body experience and witness the body. That's how you know that you are not just that. You are the perception of the consciousness in the body. So we become into body because it's a part of our nature that we are tied to. We have a communication because we have a harmonic communication through the ancestry of us, as well as through the electrical potential between the relationship in the sun and earth. So we are embodying through source, through these bodies that come into ultimately us so we can be present. So with all that said, yes, I'd like to thank you again for participating and taking time of your life to even just be present here and even take this in. I always recommend people that you just listen to as much podcast as you can in your free time, even while you're driving. Many of us who commute, is the best time to do that. And putting that in an audio format is great. And if you're listening to this at 2 times or even more, that's great too. I think the way in which we're allowing ourselves to take in information, just as much as we are allowing the potential hypernovelty in universe to come out through the use of not only generation of both through the AI mechanism, but through the human inputs of the AI mechanism, we're seeing potential arrive more and more than we know how to do it. It arrives so much faster that we see all this junk, and then there's nothing like creating so much into the reality for this eventually if Ergonian energy to come into play so that we can at the end of the day realize, oh shit, what do we have here? Do we need all this? And let's just keep what counts. But the ability that it unlocks us to discover opens up new avenues of ways we didn't even work with before, that we might even have tools that can assist us to do and create art in a manner that may not have been present with us, just like prior to photography. We change the way we do art because we change the way in which we utilize the tools. We utilize photography as an art because we capture not only a still, but now we have a moment of movement. We have a movie that we can then utilize through the use of mass collective expressionists like YouTube that we can actually express this out on. That creates not only like the idea of these motions, but the idea of the post-creation of motions, where we have this world being shaped by our input of already happening. We grew up with the reflection of knowing that this is a thing that we can one day pursue, but how do we reinvent it? How do we continue it? How do we continue to see something that is unraveling through participation? Yet we had all this capturing of nature through paintings, but then through the photography efforts, we created the whole combination of utilizing this creation of capturing a still moment of light, and then taking that light and then interpreting it into a perception. Now, the whole digitalization of everything has captured us into the pixelated world, which is more this 1 and 0 way of communicating this on-off. But this is just a perception of limitations. The way in which we work with the world is much different. So when we actually arrive at the camera, we revolutionize not only to create a still life, but to create not only a movie to a movement to, who knows, a motivation, a way in which humanity then moves itself forward. We want to understand that we can have a vehicle because it's an art form. It carries the potential to be an art, just like a symbol can be an art. So when we look at the change of AI as a potential as a tool, we don't look at complete pure AI gen, but we look at like the potential of functionings through a mass way in which we can develop tools. Let's say the ability to take a photographer can now take the footage that they have. It can then be processed. And these little functions that may be tedious might be streamlined to be a lot better, where we can hop to a faster step along the way of our processing. For example, we can capture the footage, bring it all in, apply the preset, line things up, and even with help with suggestive AI, we can develop ideas of where we can make potential cuts and changes, but we don't have to commit to that. So we don't have to have a purely AI generated material. We can have a tool act as a processor to ease the process. We can have audio being recorded and then transformed to become quality, become listening as if you have this quality device. So people aren't limited by the devices at hand, but by the ability to work with the material and the media that is present in the data. Once you have data to work with, you can change. A photographer can then take their work and turn those into paintings through AI, but that's nothing more than a digitalization of perception. So that is a limitation. What we need to understand is that when we utilize these AI functions on a digital platform, a digital world, we are limited by the creation mechanism. But when we work outside that, like by drawing with a pen and pencil and shaping with the sculpture of earth and mud and such, and even planting in seeds in the earth, we're given not only a gift to work with experience, but we have these placements that you can call, get themselves on the Akashic records. It's not the perception of the digital world through our perception. It's the perception of the world through our interaction. So the digital world is limited. We cannot fully explore it, and we cannot take that into the dream realm. There's no solid system here that plays itself outside of the function of the hardware. We can't create a system inside a system. We don't want that. We have a system. It's called the one we're in. We're interacting in. We're experiencing it. We are embodied in it. That's all we need to know and how we do. So we must not limit ourselves to these tools that are tied to devices that are limiting in their own right, because they don't have a space in the physical reality that we can revisit through ourselves, through our body, through our movement. These are digital spaces that are conceptual. They are data that we explore through the processing of interpretation. So please look at digital and AI as a potential to gift us the ability to transform something like music so that we can easily process it and share it. And we utilize these devices and systems to connect. So that is all. So in which case, this device here is connecting to you. And I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for being a part of this. And honestly, continue to stay you and be true, and anything else that motivates you. Find yourself and don't be influenced. Try to not give in, but honor and listen to yourself too. You know what's right. You know yourself better than anyone else. And like I said, you don't need me to remind you. You should know by now. And if you don't, you know by now. And if you still don't, you know now. So thank you and take care and enjoy yourself. And it's hot out there. So try to stay cool and yeah, stay true. Yeah, you got it.